And I'm sorry about that if you guys heard the alert because I didn't turn them off like an idiot. But we're going to press on anyway. That is totally fine. That's just a streamer diff. We just want to first talk a little bit to our guest, welcome them to the episode, get to know a little bit about them. So, Ace, in your own words, I'd love to hear your history with TFT, where you got started, how you got into it, and how you got to the place you're in today.
I always played a lot of League. I used to work on Riot on the playtest team for 2 years as well. So when TFT came out, definitely tried out any Riot game. I'm gonna try out. Um, so I played set one. I got challenger in set two. I didn't play set three or four much. I think I played like 100 games between both of them combined, which is, I mean, it's a decent amount. But set five, I got challenger again, and set six was the one where I like really tried to push like past that, like, challenger being top 200, where I really tried to push like really high rank. So yeah.
Brilliant. It's fantastic. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you like the set. You said you didn't play too much set three or set four. Was there a specific reason for that? Was it you didn't like those sets as much? What would you say was your favorite TFT set?
I mean, I'm fond of set two just because like that was the first set I got challenger in, so it's like it's nostalgic for me. I don't know, I like set two. I like set six a lot as well. So um, but yeah, I was a big fan of set two.
Underrated set two. I think I started in set two. I actually really enjoyed it, even though I wasn't very good back then. Maybe I'm not that good now, but I mean, who knows? Who knows? Guys, look, we had plenty of plans for the episode, and of course, as with everything, the TFT Twitter community has come out with a bunch more news, a bunch more twitlongers, a bunch more memes, but the most important thing is we've got a B patch, and that, in time of recording, is coming out tomorrow. So we're going to go through it, sort of talk a little bit about it. We're going to come to Asa first because you actually played a tournament on the current patch. So I was wondering how you sort of feel about where the balance is right now.
Um, I think the thing that I mean overall, I think it's good. Obviously, like the Riot team. I mean, like every individual player, you'll see like gold players say, "Oh man, they need to nerf this," but it's like obviously, like personally, I just believe like the Riot team, like they're gonna be able to do their job better than like anyone else. Like, even if you got like the top 20 ranked players and like there to balance the game, I'm pretty sure it'd be a lot worse. So overall, it's good. I would say my biggest complaint is in set five. I remember watching like Mortdog talking about like the biggest takeaways is like don't change too many things at once because like a lot of times the comp would go from like unplayable to OP and then it would have to be nerfed again. So like that would be my biggest complaint because I was talking to Mortdog directly. It's like, hey, like four syndicate units are getting buffed. Isn't this kind of a problem? And now I'm looking at the B patch. Ashe is getting nerfed. Zyra's nerfed. Morgana's nerfed. Ari's nerfed. Hello, like I feel like this happens every single time where it's like four units of the syndicate. The trait itself is getting nerfed, so it's like four units of the same trait being buffed and then being nerfed in the next patch. I feel like we've seen this pattern so many times. So I would say that's my only complaint. But other than that, it's good.
Yeah, very interesting. Sol, I'd love to know your thoughts. I know you've been playing much more Elden Ring than you have been playing TFT recently. But because we're on our TFT podcast, we
Yeah.
probably should talk a little bit about the TFT patch.
No,
What are your
we'll,
sort of
we'll
thoughts at the
definitely
moment?
keep it. Yeah, we'll definitely keep it TFT. I mean, it's this weird thing, right, with the Riot Balance team, where, and again, I'm not like saying this to shit on them or anything, but they keep saying time and time again, like there are these things that like we know are certain that are not very good, like for the game for game health. But they keep trying to make them work for some reason. So, Ace already mentioned that the issue with balance thrashing, like, you probably shouldn't move like 4 or 5 different levers, like that all belong to the same tree in a single go. It's really really hard to see how to know where that's gonna land. And I'll use a different example with aggro units that aggro drop, like specifically like if we think about things like Shaco, like and like Shade Z and things like that from previous sets, like they know that like aggro dropping as a mechanic is incredibly hard to balance and usually ends up being quite broken. But there always seems to be some kind of incarnation of aggro dropping in every single set. And every time they're like, yeah, this time for sure, guys. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. So, so yeah, I mean, look, it is interesting. just looking at the looking at the actual patch at a glance, I like that the overall approach is to sort of bring down the overall power level of a lot of the different comps, a lot of different units. I still feel like we're at a point where, like, I mean, they even mentioned that part of the problem is that a lot of these fights are still a bit too short for what they'd like. And they kind of want to sort of decrease the power level, and I think that's generally a good direction.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's go through some of these. I'd like to sort of talk about Corky, who's been on the receiving end of a couple of nerfs in a row now. Hey, so what are your thoughts about the sort of the Yordle opener right now? I know that Gnar is another one that's received a bit of a nerf here. I was wondering what your thoughts are on kind of the Yordle opener and how that sort of plays out at the moment.
Before I talk about Yordles, I just want to say what I was earlier saying about syndicates. I believe the term they call for this is balance thrashing. So Corki was actually buffed like a week ago.
Yeah.
As well as Lucian, both buffed.
Yeah.
And of course, big surprise, both nerfed in the V patch, sharpshooter nerfed. So this is like the thing. I was literally talking to Mort about this, and his response was like, if we gave every Yordle 10 HP, you want to say, oh, all 6 Yordles buffed, and it's like, well, I mean, I feel like that was kind of a straw man, but it's okay. We still love more dog, but yeah. So Corki was just buffed last patch. I think twin shots are really good. I feel like anyone who's been involved in TFT in the past few days knows that. So I think it's a justified nerf. So anyway, going back to what you're saying about the Yordle opener, I think Yordle opener has always been good. It was nerfed near the end of set 6, but I think it's still good. It gives you like an average of like 1.4 ish. I don't know exactly, like gold per round. And early game, a lot of the incentive to win a round is just getting that 1 gold. So if you have Yordles in, you already get that like for free in a sense. So yeah, I think it's good. Because especially in the first 3 rounds, if you're like lucky enough to hit it, because your HP doesn't really matter in the first 3 rounds. Like if you were to just ask a player, it's like, hey, you can choose what your HP is at the end of round 3. Would you rather have 100 HP or like 90 HP? I think a lot of players would just choose 90.
Interesting.
For carousel pick priority, of course. And it's not that big of a difference.
Yeah, fascinating. It's really interesting. Sol, I want to talk to you about Debonair. On the pre-show, we sort of talked a little bit about the Innovator Cup. We're not going to go too much into it, aside from saying congratulations to Spicy Appies. However, I will say that he did play a lot of Debonair during the tournament, and we are now seeing, 4 nerfs to different Debonairs. I keep wanting to call them syndicates, but that's not right. How are you feeling about that comp right now?
It's pretty strong. It's very strong. I feel like it's a difficult trait to balance because a lot of the times the VIP bonuses are quite transformative. Like the difference between a Debonair brand 3 and a non-Debonair, the difference between a VIP brand 3 and a non-VIP brand 3 is like night and day. The difference between VIP Draven and non-VIP Draven used to be like an entire canyon. It's closer now, but like it's still a lot better. So I feel like the trade is always going to be hard to balance around. So I think it's one of those traits where like towards like the start and the middle of a set, it's going to be fairly problematic in terms of like how powerful it is. It's either going to be too strong or too weak. But as the set goes on, as they learn more, get more data, they're going to get closer to sort of where you want VIPs that like Debonair VIP to be. That being said, the current state of Debonair is that it's quite good. It is quite strong. There are multiple different ways you can go about playing it. So a common way to play it is you can just play it as a reroll comp. You can reroll around either Brand or Syndra, either of which are incredibly strong AP carries. Alternatively, you can just play the comp as a standard strongest board fast A comp. You play it towards like a Draven or something, and like that's also going to be a very consistent strategy. So I think that also combined with like the fact that the carries are good, but also the fact that like bodyguards got buffed. So because you with Debonair, you always have to play around a bodyguard front lane because you have to play Leona. So the fact that the bodyguards are also in a good spot lead us to a state right now where Debonairs are quite good. So yeah.
Asa, coming to you for this one, Irresistible Charm is getting a nerf, but they've left Fairy VIP alone, which is, I in my opinion, an equally problematic augment. What are your thoughts on the augments buffing the specific traits?
I think they're both. I think they're both fine as long as like they're balanced. I don't know exactly like what. So I actually like using tactic sauce tools a lot. So right now I just checked like literally as you're saying it. It's 2.3 games, 2.3 million games at Diamond Plus M is this patch, and very VIP is like one of the worst performing augments. So it's like
Interesting.
if anything it needs a buff. Um, Whereas irresistible charm, I mean, 20% damage on your whole team is a lot better than the effect that very VIP gets.
Fascinating.
Is irresistible charm a silver augment? I can't even find it. Yes, it's silver
Yeah,
augment, and
silver.
it's
It's cool.
if
Okay.
if you take it first pick, you don't even know you take it first pick in Hard 4 Debonaires. It's like the fourth best augment in the game. So like
Understandable. It
it
gives you
makes
a
sense
loner.
that that one gets nerfed, but very VIP is like quite the opposite. Very VIP, if you take it first, it is like the fourth worst augment in the game. So I like to use the data a lot because I think just like as a player, we've probably only seen these augments. We probably only played against these augments less than 10 times. So it's like there's so many factors that go in it. Like you could easily see like one player could see someone take very VIP 10 times and like or they take it 10 times and they go first like 8 times. They're like, wow, that's so good. Another player could take irresistible charm 10 times and go eight times. They're like, wow, this augment's so bad. But when we look at the data over like 2 million games, it's like I just trust that basically.
Hmm. Fascinating, and that's certainly something that we're going to get into later on, which is the data. The final thing that I want to talk about for the patch notes, there is a lot in here. I want to talk about Innovator. It either gets nerfed, the champions that are innovators get nerfed. Basically, every patch, it feels like, since about 3/4 of the way through set 6. It certainly had its time where it wasn't a auto kind of fast 8 board in set 6. I would say right now it's pretty dominant overall. Is the bear just too good, Asa, you think?
Well, I actually really like what they're doing with Innovator because it's like they're applying like what's the word? Incremental nerfs over many patches.
Hmm.
I like that a lot because as you mentioned, like the speed patch brand, like you're just like we were talking about Syndicate and Twin Shot earlier, but Debonair is another example. Brand nerf, Syndra nerf, Talon nerf, Draven nerf, Irresistible Charm nerf, Debonair trait nerf. It's just like
There's a
I feel
lot.
like every single time this happens, like it's reverted next patch. So I much prefer what they're doing with Innovator, which is more like it's more of incremental nerf. Whereas like I think the B patch, the only thing that's really getting touched is just a bear, and it's like yeah, I mean I think that's reasonable. And then maybe it'll get nerfed a little bit more next patch, and I think that's fine too.
Fascinating, isn't it? I think it's become such a different comp in set 6.5 to what we were really used to in set 6 with so many flexible AD carry, 4-cost AD carry champions, even 3-cost if you include center as well. Sol, I know that you're a big proponent of playing innovators, and you are a very very strong innovator player. I wonder what your thoughts are on the comp right now.
Yeah, it's in a pretty good spot. It's still really strong despite it's weird because the main patch they literally even nerfed Ezreal by 580 to even
Yeah.
try to like weaken the whole innovator opener, but we're still sort of seeing its consistency as a way to reach level 8 with relatively high HP. I think a lot of it has to do with the trade itself is strong, right? Like early game, you getting an extra unit, when everyone has limited resources, that's just an inherently very powerful trait. But I think it also is combined with the fact that like the units you like play on an inner board are usually just pretty good. Like Ezreal is incredibly flexible, especially with scrap. Like you yeah, you get to leverage that scrap really easily. You can flex around a lot of different scrap units. You have like utility units like Zillion, who's actually quite good in terms of like utility. You've got a solid tank in like Singed and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the units around the trait are quite good, combined with the fact that the trait itself is very powerful, and this leads to like essentially a very consistent shell that you can play. And it's honestly very reminiscent. I compare it a lot to Sentinel Skirmisher, for those of us that have played set 5.5, where it was an opener that revolved around essentially 3 core units, but could sort of branch out into like or felt like almost an unlimited tree of like different sort of possibilities. Like you could play around all sorts of different things, right? And that's sort of the same thing with Innovator. It's more the flexibility that makes it so strong. You can splash all sorts of things around that sort of Innovator chassis.
Hot topic question. They made Echo an innovator for set 6.5. Acer, was that a mistake, you think? Is Echo just too good to be an innovator?
Well, they nerfed his mana, so I think he's worse now than he used to be. They also nerfed the attack speed slow. I think it used to. I don't know what it used to be, but I think they changed it to 15%. I think it used to be like 35%
it
or so.
started
I
at
don't.
40% in set 6.
Yeah, I don't remember what it was, but I mean they nerfed him, so I think that's fine. Um, One thing I would like to add that it makes the Innovator comp really good is most other comps need a 2-star 4 cost to stabilize. Innovator just needs 1-star Seraphine.
Yeah, fascinating. It doesn't even really need items on it either anymore, Seraphine. At the very least, not immediately when you find it. So I find myself quite often taking the Seraphine off Carousel, just whatever it's got on it, because it's an ultimate stabilizing tool.
Yeah, personally, I usually still play Seraphine as the main carry when I play Innovator, but the AD options are definitely a lot more open because Yone and Urgot did not fit that well in Innovators, but this set we still have Jin, and then Kha'Zix is free assassin synergy, and then Irelia is like you just need one more for 4 scrap. It's pretty strong as well. You also get Socialite, which is strong with Irelia with Seraphine.
Sure. That's like the bear itself synergizes really well, right? With Irelia buffing that AD. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my final thought here would be that I know that B patches are generally tended to be quite small. This one is huge. I will say they've changed so many things.
Yeah, it almost feels like a full patch.
It does. It feels like a full patch. One of the things that they have done is, well, at least the very few buffs that they've made have actually been to Sivir and Strikers. That's including a Rek'Sai buff in there as well. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on Sivir. I mean, she was the best comp for the first 2 days, basically, that along with Renata, who is missing from this sort of patch notes altogether. Where do you think Sivir fits in right now? Is she still viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sivir's just a really fun champion because, like I said, set 2 is my favorite set.
Yeah.
Sivir was like, I think she was introduced in like 2.5. I don't think they officially called it that, but she was introduced like later on in the set, and I really like Sivir a lot. So yeah, I mean, everything just in terms of like the unit functionality, everything's viable. It just depends on the numbers, right? Because like Hextech, nothing changed between it being like S tier to kind of F tier, except just like the numbers for like 6 Hextech. So I like that they're buffing Sivir because I think Hextech is still a little bit too weak compared to the alternatives. Compared to like Draven, Irelia, Kha'Zix, Jhin, the other 4 cost AD carries. So yeah, I think it's good that they're buffing her. And I also like what we were talking about, like it's an incremental buff, right? They're not buffing Sivir and Hextech and Alistar but like they're just buffing Sivir, so I like that a lot. Actually, Lucian's getting nerfed, so.
Yeah, Lucian, I would imagine is more of a response to how prevalent the Lucian GP twin shot Corki kind of build is at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of these changes are pretty minor, but it is like a little bit when we're seeing so many in the same tree getting hit at the same time. Yeah.
Yep. Sure.
that's pretty much going to do it, guys. I mean, for the patch notes at least, when the episode comes out, if you're an audio listener, you will be able to find the link to the patch notes there if you need to see them. I would really, really love to get on to the main topic of this episode. It is one that I am going to take a slight backseat on, despite being a poker enjoyer. I was not a master poker player. But a lot of the technical aspects of poker do have a significant crossover in some respects to different games. And we're basically here to ask, is one of those games TFT, and how we can maybe even that out to give us an advantage when we're playing TFT. Hey, so I'll come to you first. You told us in the pre-show that you don't play all that much poker anymore, focusing a lot on TFT. I was wondering, in your own words, poker and TFT, are there similarities that you take from your time playing poker and put them into play when you're playing TFT?
Yeah, I mean, I played poker full time for like almost a decade, so I've played a lot, and it's just like if you think about TFT, but there's only 2 items in the game and only 2 units, that would probably be about as complicated as poker is. So you get bored. So I'm kind of bored of it basically. But I would say like the core skill to master both games are very similar. It's just like being able to. I mean, the most important skill is like just being able to learn from your mistakes, being able to improve after every game. That's kind of like unrelated to the game itself. It's like if you want to become like a good tennis player, it's like the same thing, right? Um, so I would say like that's the most important thing, but I would say like, logic and like sometimes like dealing with probabilities is something that's in common with TFT and poker, where it's like, oh, like if I do this play, there's like a 70% chance that I think I'll get third. If I do this play, there's like an 80% chance I'll get third, but I might have a smaller chance to get first, and then you kind of like calculate which one has a higher expected value for like your LP. So yeah, I would say poker you do a lot of that, and same in TFT.
Sol, my friend, I think I'm going to open up the floor to you here, because when we were planning for the Acer episode, for this episode in particular, you said to me there were so many things that you wanted to discuss in terms of poker and how it relates to TFT. So I'd really love to open up the floor
Yeah, for sure.
to you, and let's get into the meat and potatoes of it all.
Yeah, I mean for sure. It's for like I guess for disclosure in terms of my own poker background. It's obviously nowhere near as storied and glamorous as Ace's 10 whole years of playing professionally, but I have been playing poker sort of casually on and off for about like 4 or 5 years now. And towards the sort of start, I was really, really obsessed with the game. Like probably the first 2 years of playing poker, I was really, really obsessed. Like I would, go through like all the different YouTube videos, all the different trading sites, all the different materials, and I would really, really learn, like really, really try my hardest to like learn the game basically at a sort of more strategical and in-depth level, rather than just like looking at it as a form of sort of gambling or like a way to have fun. So without getting too sort of abstract into all all the sort of finer details about poker, I'll say that like big picture wise, the core sort of idea of poker and just the goal of poker is to basically maximize your expected value in any single situation. You're trying to extract the most amount of your equity in any given hand. You're trying to basically get the most amount of like value that you can. And if you fail to do this, then you're basically making a mistake, and you need to figure out how to plug those mistakes so that in the future, right, you can get more out of it basically. And so like this sort of really broad concept does translate very well to a lot of these other video games out there, a lot of in particular strategy games that have luck and variance as a really, really big part of their game systems. The only difference is that, as Asa mentioned with poker, you can really think of it as you have 2 items and 2 champions at all times if you're playing Texas Hold'em, right? So the whole sort of game tree, as we call it, your like the amount of different decisions that you can actually make is actually quite limited. And now if we sort of look at TFT, right, the game that we all play in common, that game has an almost sort of endless matrix of different sort of things that you can do, and endless different matrix of decisions, which make it so that like the game is incredibly more, I would say, maybe complex is potentially the wrong word, but there's a lot more room for like different decisions and different sort of moves and everything. And so I guess what I kind of want to get at is that I think it would be sort of interesting to just sort of probe, I guess, our guest Asa in terms of like what sort of, I guess, what sort of, I mean, you did already speak about it a little bit earlier, but what sort of like learnings in terms of like how you sort of build, I guess, like a form of like decision making, how you actually like build a way to sort of like objectively analyze your games. How do you like begin to formulate this kind of mentality to even begin with, would be the way I would sort of want to frame the discussion.
You mean in poker or TFT or both?
Oh, TFT. As in like what, so like with poker, right? There's like a specific sort of way we need to sort of look at hands objectively. There's a way we sort of need to analyze decisions and everything like that, right? So like how can we sort of apply those concepts to TFT and become a better sort of TFT player as a result, I guess?
I would say one thing is like as a default, it's a little bit complicated, but basically like for simplicity, you can basically assume there does exist a perfect strategy. Like no human can do it. For example, in chess, which is much simpler than TFT, the robots can beat Magnus Carlsen like 99% of the time. They're like, just because like it's just too hard for any human being to do. And TFT is much more complex. Even like a single round of TFT is more complex than all of chess. So like we can't ever achieve it, but I just try to think like we try to do the best we can to like know what the correct play. You can VOD review, you can discuss with people. Let's start with something really simple. Very first round, your shop has a Twitch pair and a Poppy pair, and then let's say you took a Caston off the carousel and it's a execute move and there's a Caston. So your shop is Caston, 2 Twitch, 2 Poppies. In theory, there's one of those that holding one of those pairs gives you the highest expected value to win the game. There's no way for us to know what it is. No one is that good. I'm sure some people will say, "Oh, hold Twitch, whatever." But it's like whatever. I would hold Poppy because I like Yordles.
I'd hold Poppy as well, yeah.
But yeah,
interesting. I hold Cassidy in that scenario.
Interesting. See, this is already
right. So it's basically there does exist one choice that is like it's just correct. I will say it's a little nuanced because it's a multiplayer game, right? So let's say you have 7 players in your lobby who like heavily lean into mutants, then you probably don't hold Caston. But there's one choice that's correct, but like we don't know what it is. The best we can do is just like through our experiences of playing a lot of games and studying VODs and watching other players play and like seeing who's successful, and like obviously like in NA right now, Setsuko is extremely successful. So I've been like watching his VODs and like watching him stream live as well. And I just like I'm seeing what units he's preferring and how he's so high elo. And I'm like, okay, in this spot he played this board where I would have played this board. So I'm like, okay, this is probably like I'm making a mistake here. So then you just like accumulate that knowledge and you just try to get better at get better and better. You try out like I use a very simple example, but this applies all the way into late game. Like there could be a spot like, oh, like do I play this unit for this synergy? Do I play like Scholar or Clockwork here? Like maybe you're playing like a Syndicate Ari board or a Syndicate Ash board, and it's like, oh, I can either fit in like Scholar or Clockwork, but not both, or I could fit in. Yeah, so I mean, it's just like you just play games and you just see what works out, and I think that's kind of like what differentiates like really good players from the rest, because like I said, the sample size is always an issue, because like maybe one game I chose to play, let's say one game I chose to play Clockwork and I won the game, but maybe it was just my opponents had low roll boards. So maybe it wasn't better at all. So it's like it's really up to the player to figure out like what the differences are. It's really up to the player to figure out like what the correct decision is, yeah. but yeah, just like watch the fights and be like, yeah, because like everyone kind of realized like Silco is like really good before he got like nerfed. Because like I just put Silco on my board and I watched the fight. I'm like, wow, this unit just like
Just win.
nothing ever dies and his
Yeah.
whole team dies. Yeah.
And every board you lose to has a Silco on it, and then you realize every time you lost, you didn't have a Silco.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
using the data a lot. I know Morpdog recently tweeted against it. I feel like it was at least a little bit targeted at me because I'm always posting in lobby too about like, oh, on tactics.tools it says like this unit is like same play rate but much higher win rate than this other unit. But I think I like using the data a lot as well. Obviously, like anytime you use the data, you have to also use your brain because like for example, on the first patch of set 6, Alawi had a really high win rate, and it's like, well, you only play Alawi if it gives you 6 bruiser. So like you have to like use your brain and make those connections. You can't just be like, oh wow, Alawi's OP, I'm gonna play her. But no, it's like the only time they had her in the final board is that they were playing 6 bruiser, which was just really strong. So yeah.
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 In fact, oh sorry. Did you wanna? I didn't
No,
mean to
no.
interrupt.
The only thing I was going to say there is, I think back to a similar scenario that you pointed out there in set 3, where the highest win percentage unit for the last few patches of set 3 was the 2-cost Mordekaiser, because it was just it was like the last 6 weeks of set 3 where everybody played Darkstar, and that was basically it. It was like 3 people per lobby played Darkstar, so the variance of that one unit having the highest, like a very high win percentage, was always really high, because there was always somebody, well, not always, but there was multiple people in the lobby playing the same unit all the time, and it was often doing very well because the comp was so good. So the variance there led the stats to show that Mordekaiser was one of the best units to play in the game, but 4 people had Mordekaiser too by the end of the game. So it's very interesting. Very interesting. Sorry, Sol, let you go back to it.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I wanted to I wanted to sort of touch even more sort of on the whole stat side, because I feel like you're like one of the first players I've actually sort of talked to that sort of really sort of goes sort of deep on using the statistics as a sort of actual legitimate form of analysis, where I feel like a lot of and this is not to say that like using anecdotal sort of evidence is bad at all, but I feel like a lot of the challenger communities in even in a lot of different regions, they go about analyzing different situations based on sort of anecdotes. They'll be like, oh, this X unit is really broken because in this game it did this, not like this unit is really broken because it has like like a 60+% win rate and like blah 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 blah, right? So I feel like that's I don't know if like I'm just sort of repeating a lot of what you already said, but I just thought that it was really interesting that like sort of when we're looking at when we sort of use stats as a way of trying to figure out what's actually good. But it is also important to sort of be like to sort of figure out like which of these stats are like extremely skewed, and to figure out the reasons why the stats are like skewed. So yeah, I don't know if that was like an actual like talking point or whatever, but like I just thought it was interesting to sort of retouch on that point, because yeah, I did find it really interesting that you look at the stats a lot.
Well, back when I worked at Riot Playtest, this was for Summoner's Rift, of course. I think a lot of times like a player like even a challenger player potentially, because like maybe they had really good mechanics, but like okay, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like a player could say, wow, how can you give this character 3 dashes, a point and click stun? Okay, I'm just making this up. I don't know if this character
Yeah,
exists. Like
It
3
probably does,
dashes,
yeah.
a point and click stun, or whatever. And it's like this character is like solver powered, but it's like you realize if you just like take 10 AD off this character, it's gonna be literally like garbage tier. So it's just like you can't just say like, oh, it can do XYZ, therefore it must be good. Um so yeah. Safety and TFT is just like sample size. Like so, like I've had people come to my Twitch channel and be like, hey, I built this item on this unit and it felt really good and I got first. I'm like, well, I look at tactics.tools and out of Ari's top 20 items, Rageblade is the 19th out of 20 best item. So I think it's pretty bad. Also,
Yeah.
I did the math, and it takes 15 autos to break even with blue buff for cast per minute or whatever. So I'm like, yeah, this seems terrible to me. But that's just one example. I know like Soju and Dish Soap are proponents of Rage Blade Ari, but I think it's really bad.
Interesting, interesting.
It'd be really
Um,
interesting to hear your thoughts. You mentioned something before. Sorry to cut in. I just wanted to say,
that's okay.
you said that Mort has tweeted a little bit about not being a huge proponent of looking deep into the stats. I was wondering if you could. I mean, you don't have to guess, but I guess my question is, why do you think that Mort maybe thinks that way, and do you think that that's a reasonable take for the game designer, one of the lead to have?
Oh yeah, it's definitely reasonable because I mean he's basically just saying you can't just blindly follow the stats. Like I go to
Mm.
Tactics.tools again, 2.3 million games to analyze this patch, like not even counting set 6.5, this patch, and it says Seneca, Astra Morgana, top comp, 22% win rate. But like you can't just look at that and you know how I mentioned earlier, like there's a theoretical correct way to play TFT that we can't reach.
Mm.
We don't know that Syndicate should be the best or most played comp. Like it's just um because people think it's good, they're more likely to play it and like learn how to play it and get really comfortable with like the ins and outs and learn how to optimize the items and positioning and everything. So it's like you can't just blindly follow the stats. But I mean, I think they're very useful, but you can't just follow it blindly. You still have to like use your brain a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to sort of
Yep.
touch on that a bit more. Actually, in the what you said earlier about how in any sort of given situation, there's theoretically sort of a perfect way to play. So to sort of explain it to our sort of viewers, it's basically it is a concept that does transfer sort of from poker. So the long story short of it is that the current sort of state of sort of like professional poker and just playing poker for like seriously for money is that a lot of the play is based around these sort of softwares which are called solvers, and essentially it's essentially like think of it as just a computer program that can run simulations and run simulations of millions and millions and millions of hands and will tell you exactly what you should do with whatever hand in any situation. So a lot of sort of understanding how to play sort of poker right now is sort of running these simulations and then looking at it and then thinking, okay, why does the computer choose to do, this? Why does the computer choose to do this? However, in reality, the most profitable way to actually make money is not to necessarily do like everything verbatim, but there's also that sort of human side to it as well, where you can there's room for a lot of sort of unorthodox and weirder sort of decisions, right? And if we sort of bring this back to TFT, like there are going to be a lot of situations where like yes, like this specific thing to do is technically like more correct to do or like will win more games, but maybe this other like sort of weird thing to do actually, for this specific person will yield better results because of like because a maybe like it caters to their playstyle, maybe like it's good in that specific lobby. It could be a wide sort of variety of different sort of reasons. So I just thought that that was like sort of interesting to sort of maybe touch on just the whole concept of like in theory there's a perfect way to play if computers could play computer programs could play the game, right? But I think it's just really really interesting when you sort of add the human element to it as well, and you factor in the fact that like we humans, we our strategies are always going to be imperfect. We're going to make all sorts of different mistakes, but then that also leads to sort of out of the box sort of thinking and ways to play the game. Sorry if that was like a bit of a long tangent, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I would say like chess is another game. I think there will be some people who will swear one game is more complicated than the other, but I think that is a mark that is like we don't really know, right? Like chess and
Mm.
poker, in my mind, are roughly they're at least in the same ballpark of complexity because there's a lot of debate which one of these two games is more complicated. I think it is very clear that TFT is more complicated than both of them, but I will say like the thing with like these solvers is like it's like let's say you have like two of the top chess players playing each other, and one of them is like they're gonna be offered a move by the engine. They're like forced to play that move, even though they might not normally play that move. You are correct that it's not always going to be better because there's a human element, and they might not be comfortable. Like they might not know what to do after. And same thing with poker. Like they might not be comfortable with like the situation that puts them in. But I think just the skill gap is so much higher that it's generally just gonna be better. Um,
Sure.
Again, just like the discrepancies, like you can for poker, like Libratus is like a pretty old poker engine, but it's like one of the more famous ones where it played against a lot of the top players and just completely destroyed them. And same thing in chess. It's like top computer software completely destroy Magnus Carlsen. It's like the skill gap would be like it would be like the skill gap would be like, I mean, if we had a perfect TFT like thing, it would probably top. And we just like if we could play TFT perfectly and just set this robot on the NA ladder, I think it would top. There's variance in the game, but I think it would probably top for like 95 or at least percent of its games, probably, if not like closer to 100, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like, yeah, so to sort of just add like a exclamation mark on the sort of this specific topic, I think that like it's really interesting that like yes, in theory, like if a perfect AI existed, it would just completely crush everyone, right? But the thing is that like we're not playing against AIs yet, at least. We're playing against
Yeah.
other humans, so our strategies are all going to be flawed and imperfect. And I think that that's quite it almost has a beauty in a way, in that like your strategy may be imperfect, but it could be perfect for this specific situation, right? Because everyone else's strategy is also flawed and imperfect. So yeah.
Yeah, when I said there's basically a correct strategy, there is a nuance that I didn't mention earlier, but I guess I'll say what it is now. It's in a multiplayer game. It's you can't really say it because it depends on the other players, but it's generally like accepted that it's yeah. But I mean, yeah, like I said, like let's say my entire lobby only plays six shortle. That's all they play. The other seven players.
Yep.
Well, if I follow my strategy and I get an opener that's like, again, like this opener that I used earlier, two poppies, two castings, two twitches. Maybe on average, poppy is the best unit to hold, but in that situation, you should definitely not hold the poppy.
Yep.
Actually, maybe I actually think it's kind of what's that? I'm not sure what the word is. It's kind of like a prisoner's dilemma kind of thing where I actually think if seven people on the yordle are playing six yordle, I think if the one person doesn't play six yordle, they actually guaranteed eighth because everyone else gets yordle lord on stage 3.
Yes, correct. I mean, this is yeah. We can talk about the prisoner's dilemma real quick. In fact, this concept probably applies to any sort of contested situation with any reroll comp. So if we want to apply that, okay. So wait. Okay, actually, I don't even remember the original prisoner's dilemma, to be honest. Do you
The
remember
original prisoner's dilemma is
Yeah.
basically like we both should do X and that's the best for both of us.
Yeah.
But if either one of us doesn't do X, it's better for us. So what ends up
Yeah, that's
happening
right.
is both players will not do X, even though the best thing they could do is both agree to do X, because if either one of them like backstabs the other person, they benefit from it.
That's right.
No matter, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's
like
like
in a tier.
they benefit. Sorry, I
No,
misphrased
no, no,
that.
you're good. You're
If
good.
you backstab, you benefit no matter what. No matter what the other person chooses. If you choose option Y, then you benefit. So yeah.
Yeah, so you'll always end up backstabbing. Yeah, so to be a little bit less abstract and we apply that to TFT, right? Let's say you're playing reroll and the other guy's also contesting your reroll comp. Basically, according to the Prisoner's Dilemma, you should never ever pivot out of your comp. You should hold hand 7A because the reason is if you pivot out of your comp, then the guy gets to just take your the other person just gets to take your units and then they're just completely uncontested. And then they get to go top, top 4, top 2, whatever basically. So, it's a situation where yes, you're mutually destroying each other by going 7-8 by, not pivoting out of each respective reroll comp. But you're never incentivized to pivot out of your reroll comp because all that does is let the other guy hit all their units and then go top 4 if you pivot out.
Oh, I completely disagree with that. I think you very
really?
you very much
Okay.
are incentivized to pivot. It is actually very interesting because there's again talking about AI. There's like a iterated. There's like a competition where you write a program and you play basically this prisoner's dilemma game against the other contestants, which are just other programs written by other people. and you play them in like a best of 20 or whatever, like 20 games in a row where you can choose whether to backstab or cooperate. So it's like obviously if you backstab every time, other people are gonna be like, no, fuck you. So you have to like write your program to cooperate some, right? So I guess like playing on ladder is like this. If you're expecting to play against the same players a lot, uh, where it's like maybe you gain a meta advantage if other people know you're not going to pivot. But I think in an individual game, let's say it's the final game of a tournament, let's say it's final game of regionals, you should always pivot, right? Because like, why would you self-destruct in that situation when you could increase your own EV? It's like in that situation, you should always pivot, right? If it's only one game. The only downside
Yeah.
is like the meta, where it's like if you play against that player in the ladder, then they might be more inclined to like try to bully you out of your comp.
That's fascinating. I think
But
the really
personally, I always pivot.
yeah the really interesting thing about the original Prisoner's Dilemma, of course, is that the prisoners have no way to communicate. In TFT,
Yes.
Indeed, you can talk.
technically you can actually tell somebody what you're going to do, and it
There's a lot
actually
of that in the tournament, yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
And it's certainly like you mentioned on ladder as well. It's actually you know that somebody in your lobby, let's say, oh, that guy one tricks Twitch. Like I've seen that guy. That guy only plays Twitch every game, and you get you get like your like 1-2 shop has Twitch 2 in it for whatever whatever reason. It happens relatively often. That you get a 2 cost off your first shop. And then that's the big difference. You have to decide. You get to decide, knowing that that person can communicate with you, if you're actually going to pivot or not. And that's the interesting game theory aspect of it all.
In Innovation Cup, I actually my first 2 games I played 7 Syndicate both games. And then my next 4 lobbies, I had Socks in all 4 of my games, and his stream title, where obviously everyone's mandatory to stream, his stream title is No Scout, No Pivot, 1 Darius, and I hard commit Syndicates. And I actually never played Syndicates ever in any of those other 4 games, even though I was like very inclined to, because I was like, okay, if I play it, I for sure am contesting at least one person. We also had some other players that were like very heavy Syndicate players, so I was just like, I'm already a little bit more disinclined to play it.
We'll bring that up with Socks when we have him on the podcast next week. We'll ask him about that.
But yeah, Socks was basically the guy who benefited from that, because I was like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not gonna hold hands and go 8th with you. Fuck this.
Yeah,
He was like, I'm willing to do it. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that.
that's what I mean, right? I guess that was sort of the point I was originally getting at. When you are the person forcing the specific reroll comp, rather, actually, it is in your best interest to never ever pivot out, because the minute you pivot, you send the sort of message that like if someone contests you, you're willing to pivot. But if that person knows that you're never pivoting, then they will never. They in theory should never contest you because they're just self-destructing, right?
Well, I mean, that's also a meta thing, because Socks was actually contested a lot, and he did not make day 2. I didn't make day 2 either, by the way, but he also did not make day 2. And it's like, he was contested a lot. Like I was in those games. Like there were multiple Syndicate players where I might have played it as well. Like, and like I guess what I was saying, like if it's the final game, like let's say it's the final game regionals, let's say it's Worlds, final game of Worlds, so it's like the most like prestigious, like, I mean, you're not gonna sacrifice that game for your reputation.
Yeah.
Interesting, very interesting.
Agreed. And we actually
Yeah, I mostly agree.
another similar in the Innovator Cup where Ramkev, is it Ramkev or Spencer, whoever it was, basically only played Twitch for like 3 days. And
Yeah,
was
that's
it.
Spencer.
Spencer. He just played Twitch basically every lobby. Nobody else played Twitch in any of his lobbies.
He
For the
got
whole thing.
contested.
A couple of times. Yeah, very interesting. I really enjoy that aspect of game theory because we have the significant ability to communicate our intentions with people in this game.
Yeah, I guess going into what Soul says, like where you can't say it's correct to always do something, because even like I said in this AI competition where it's like you only have 2 choices, cooperate or backstab, and then you play 20 games against like another program. The ones that win the tournament they're definitely not always doing one choice or the other. So
Mhm.
you definitely can't say it's like always correct to do one thing or the other.
Mm. And that's when we get into the human element as well. We just got a comment in chat like, I don't want to be known as the guy that pivoted. Like, I don't want to be known as a pivoter. And I think that's the that's the that's the game within the game. That's the man behind the camera, the man in the behind the curtain, the glass ceiling, everything like that. You don't get to know what they're thinking unless they specifically tell you, and it comes to fruition. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Really interesting point of conversation there.
I will say that like almost no one has reached like a really high rank playing only one comp unless like the patch. It could happen, but the patch must be like really imbalanced. From like again, like you mentioned something in set 3. I didn't play set 3, but I played set 2, 5, and 6. And yeah, no one has reached like a super high rank playing like only one comp. Like the closest I can think of in my mind is Kiyun playing the Nocturne in set 2,
Yeah.
known as Blender. I think he eventually was rank 1 at one point, but he was playing other stuff too. Like when he was hard committed to only playing Nocturne, he was always like pretty high, like top 10, but never won. And then when he like opened up that flexibility, then he was able to climb, right? So because you're not always gonna get units for that. Like what if you get Rod tier as like your first 3 items?
I was gonna say, I think we have seen periods though in at least like it's funny that you missed you missed at 3 because I remember Mech was incredibly dominant at points in set 3, and a lot of the top people on the leaderboards were Mech only one tricks. But I want to say that like
that's all I did.
I do want to say that people were a lot worse at the game back then as well, and I think that like people being known for like a single comp and hitting rank 1 off of only playing that comp is mostly a thing of older TFT sets rather than newer TFT sets. Could be wrong on that one. This is just like based off like feel, but yeah.
It's I think a lot of the newer sets of TFT, let's say like 5.5 onwards, I would say probably, where you would say that there was a significant sort of shift in overall balance design to make kind of high impact decisions feel more impactful to your overall board. You definitely see like a big change, like you mentioned there, and certainly a different design philosophy from the team that probably really helps. I think that fact. Yeah, Mech is a big one. Mech's because I mean, I guess it really depends. Like, I mean, in set 3, Sox was like what, he was rank 1 and 2. He had like nearly 4k LP combined on both of his rank 1 and 2 accounts. So there's no way he was just one trick. Like, I think
for sure
the patches don't last long enough for you to be like, oh yeah, this guy only played the one comp for the entirety of a set, except Mech, where it was never really unplayable, I don't think. Because there were even instances in set 2, I mean, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Asa, but there was instances in set 2 where Blender was like hard nerfed pretty consistently. And it wasn't like the
different
best
comps
comp.
were good at different times for sure. I mean, at the start of it, like Ocean Mages was the dominant comp.
Cool.
Yeah.
I actually briefly wanted to talk about just results oriented sort of thinking and analysis in general. I know that like all of us on the pod don't really struggle with this, and probably a lot of our listeners who play the game a lot probably don't. But I guess I always found it sort of interesting to sort of how you get past that initial hurdle of being results oriented, because at least that like when I think about myself, I know that when I first started playing sort of games with a lot of variance in them, I was quite results oriented, and it took me quite a while to sort of get past that initial hurdle. Luckily, by the time I arrived at playing TFT, I'd already learned that from like a lot of previous different experiences. But I guess it's just I guess I want this topic to be more framed at like the more sort of newer sort of beginners who maybe don't really have much experience with games that have a lot of luck in them, and they struggle with the idea that you can make a decision that's correct but still get punished and like lose despite making the better decision.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like to just if you're, I guess like if you're talking about a total beginner who's not familiar with the concept, I would just say like, okay, what if I say, hey, I'll roll a dice. If it's a 1, you have to give me $10. If it's any other number, I'll give you $100. And then you're like, all right, let's do it. And then I roll it and it's a 1, and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Would anyone actually say that?
Yeah.
Probably not. So that's like a very extreme example. But yeah, I mean the same applies in TFT. It's like you might make the correct decision, that like a certain, maybe like taking a certain item off the carousel is going to give you like, that might be the correct decision that give you the highest chance. Well, let's say for example you have 6 innovator with like innovator heart, and you take a Jace with like, you have a choice of taking either like a Morello, which you don't have, which is very good in that comp obviously, or like a Jace with an item you don't need, and you take the Jace and your next chop has a Jace, and you're like, well, you can't just say like, oh, I shouldn't have taken the Jace. That would be like very results oriented. um so I guess it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's just like, how do you figure that out? I mean, I guess like having a VOD, like you can download OBS for free. It takes like 5 minutes, and just having VODs and like being able to review them, like not in the heat of the moment, because when you're playing a game, first of all, you're emotionally invested in the game, and second of all, like you only have 30 seconds, so you don't really have time to even think about that. But you can look at the VOD later. You can send it to you can, maybe ask like a top player. Like Reddit, like all the time has like GM plus or even challenger players on the competitive TFT subreddit, just being like, hey, like I'll coach you for free. So it's like you send it to any of those guys and like be like, hey, did I make the right choice here? Um, so yeah, I just think you just have to be objective about it and just not, yeah, I mean, just not be results oriented.
See, I think that that's sort of the interesting part of it, I guess, is that like I think for players like us, it almost seems sort of, I guess, obvious in a way, and that like, oh yeah, of course, this was fine. Of course, like this, like of course you shouldn't be, results oriented or whatnot. But I think that like the interesting part is that a lot of people do sort of default to that sort of line of thinking. I'll use sort of more sort of closer subtle examples. So for example, like maybe you were like, I don't know, maybe you were trending towards playing like an AD comp, and then you took like an AD item or whatever, and then you proceed to get dropped purely like AP items and everything, and then like someone in your chat might be like, oh, why didn't you be more like open? Why, like, as in like, why weren't you more flexible? Blah blah blah. When like, you know, it's pure. This is one purely random like sort of instance where like you had your entire game plan before that, right? Before that sort of thing happened, and like once that thing happens, it's like, oh, why did you play AD? You got dropped all these AP items, and it's like, well, I was the 80% of the game, I was doing this completely other thing, and now I'm expected to like completely change everything based on that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's part of what makes like really good TFT players is like being able to like flex around your items, because like there's some players that like they're playing 6 Arcanist and they get sword bow glove from Raptors, and they're just like, oh, I got so unlucky, like I can't play the game, like that's why I bought 4. But then there are other players who are like, okay, like maybe I can fit like a Jin Oreo in my comp and put these items on Jin, or like I fit a Jace in my comp or something like. So I mean, you just like, that's another big skill in TFT. You just have to be flexible and just like anytime, like, okay, obviously if you had gotten dropped like 2 rods 2 tiers, your probability of placing higher is better. So it's like, yes, because you got those drops, it was unlucky. Your average placement was lower otherwise, but you can't just say like, that's why I lost. That's probably not why you lost, unless you're like
Sure.
challenger, because like if you're like a diamond player, then you shouldn't focus on factors outside your control. You should just focus on things that you can do better.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, maybe I didn't like use like the greatest example, to be honest. I guess I was more just trying to say that like I think sorry, I think I really didn't use the best example I could have possibly used. I think your original like one of like picking the Jace and then the Jace showing up later in your shop was like a good one. Like just like you go for like one decision, like you go for like one tree because it makes sense right now, and then something shows up that in hindsight looks like would have been better if you did X thing, right? But at the time you did X thing, you couldn't have possibly anticipated the result coming down the line. Actually,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, that's probably a better addendum. Actually, sorry, if I can quickly, yeah, that might be a better addendum to what I was trying to say earlier. With like, you started off playing that AD comp, and then you got dropped sort of AP items, and now you have to try to figure out how to use those AP items. And then instead of looking at it as like, like why why aren't you just playing a full AD comp? You have to be like, wait, hold on, I've got these AP items that like I have to try to figure out how to use. Like I have to try to flex some kind of AP carry in here, some kind of unit that can actually use these items. Otherwise, they're just gonna be done on my bench. But yeah.
I would say like this kind of mentality extends to outside of just the game itself. I know some people are like, oh man, like 3 augments sometimes are just completely unplayable. Like they should have given us 4 augments. But just imagine we're in like an alternate universe. Everything is the exact same except we have 4 augments in set 6. Can you not imagine those same people being like, "Oh man, 4 augments is so unplayable. They should give us 5
Cheers,
augments." So it's
5.
just like that mentality, you know. It's just like you just have to it's just that mentality that's like people are always it's human nature, it's evolutionary actually. It's where it's like to survive in this world, we have to like be confident in our decisions. And like I mean, this is like getting really deep, but it's like now that we have civilization, it's kind of like vestigial, but it's like it's human nature to not blame ourselves in those situations, basically. And it's not like our fault or anything. It's like literally what humans needed to do to survive, and the ones who didn't do that like died out. So it's like
And that's why we blame Mort instead of ourselves.
yeah, basically, like it's like millions or billions or however long years of evolution. That's basically why people are always like, "Oh, I got more dogged," instead of saying, "Oh, like I should have done this." But like in order to be like a really, really good player, you do have to like rein that in and be like and focus on what you can do better instead of just like focusing on the variance.
For sure.
Yeah, totally agree.
I,
That's a really interesting point too. Sorry, Ace, I'll let you finish that. What you were just gonna say.
oh, I was just gonna say like I like my favorite TFT streamer to watch is actually like Box. And I noticed like most of the time after he finishes the game, he's like, "Oh, I should have done this. I should have done this." He's a challenger player, right? So he's like, "I should have done this. I should have done this." But if he's really tilted, he's just like, "Dude, this was so unlucky. This was so unlucky. This was so unlucky." So it's just like, yeah, and it's the same like for everyone. Everyone does it.
Yeah, everyone
the
that
time.
wants to be good at this game is competitive. I mean, of course, coming from we come from competitive backgrounds ourselves. We both played competitive card games. You, of course, from poker. Your gut reaction to like losing, you can lie to me all you want. Anybody's gut reaction to losing is never the first thing you say is never, oh, like I'm really, really proud of how my opponent just played just then. Like, and you can be the most magnanimous person ever, and I know for a fact that there are significant, people out there that are very magnanimous in victory or defeat, but you are destined to consider your own feelings on that topic first, and that I think that plays into why it's such a competitive feeling when you think to yourself after a game, shit, man, this sucks. Like that really sucks. I should have done this. Like I could have done that, but like that part wasn't my fault. That guy fucked me there. That guy did something that really pissed me off. It's natural. I think it's natural.
Yeah, yeah, it's human nature.
Absolutely.
I didn't think we'd be getting so deep into human nature on this episode. Hey, so from
That's
a
also
oh, sorry, you go.
I was just gonna say that's also why poker is so it's why it's so popular. It's like why it's one of the only games that people compete against each other for money. It's for example, let's say people set up like TFT money matches where it's like, but then I saw like let's say like for example I have Setsuko in my lobby, and it's like, all right, whoever places higher, I give you $100, or he gives me $100. Whoever places higher, I'm not gonna take it because I can see that his LP is way above me. But in poker, you don't. Poker doesn't have a ranking system, so when you go, you don't know how good everyone is. So if you go to a random casino anywhere in the U.S., most tables are 9 players per table, and you ask like every single person in private. I mean, they won't tell you the truth, but like if you can know privately what every single person thought, like their ranking of the player, like how good they are relative to other players, I would say on average, 8 out of 9 players probably think they're in the better half. Um, Obviously, like only like 4.5 on average, and probably like on average, about half the players probably think they're the number one best player at the table. So it's just that's kind of what keeps poker going.
And that's how I feel when I get into a lobby and I see diamond players in my lobby accidentally. And wow, sometimes it's hubris at the same time as well, isn't it? It's a mixture of feeling secure and insecure in that fact.
Oh, it's definitely hubris, and also Dunning-Kruger, where it's
Yeah.
like
Oh,
to be
sure.
good, you have to do. Let's say to be good, you have to do 100 things good, and you're really good at 20 out of these 100 things. But you're not good at the other ones, so you literally don't even recognize them. So you see these 20 things. Oh man, all these other guys are doing these 20 things wrong, but they could be doing like 40 things right that you're not doing right. So it's just
Mm.
like, it's very natural for people to think like, oh, I'm better than all these people because they that's just what Dunning-Kruger is.
Mm.
It's not a diss to say someone's like experiencing that. It's just everyone experiences it because you literally don't know what those things are.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for our listeners that you know have perhaps not heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's essentially describing a sort of state of mind where you believe that you are much better than you actually are at doing something. It's typically something that you have very little experience in actually doing it, or just don't do a lot. So I'll bring the whole discussion full circle back to the topic of balance.
It's all
Players
elo
are,
hell.
as I say, players are really good actually at figuring out what's wrong with the game. They are usually terrible at actually fixing the game. Like a lot of people are like, "Oh man, let's use the example of TFT." They're like, "Oh man, this thing's so broken. This thing's so broken. If I was in Mort's shoes, I would change this." And most of the time, they'll probably be like those changes will be completely terrible changes. And like it's funny that people get in that state of mind, despite the fact that like they have zero game design experience. Like they haven't gone
Yes,
to school for game
exactly.
design. Yeah, they haven't gone to school for game design. They haven't made games before. They haven't done any of this before. But like in their mind, yeah, if I was a designer, the game would be way more balanced for sure. So yeah, I think it is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's what I said at the start. Like I don't like the balanced thrashing where it's like 4 debonair units and the trait and the irresistible charm all being nerfed at once. But like the design team, I think they're gonna make the best decision out of anyone out there. So it's like, that's something I personally might disagree with, but I mean overall it's like, yeah, they're doing a good job.
Love to
And
hear
yeah,
your thoughts, Asa.
it is very so like I can again it's very human nature, but it's so if you just step back for a second, it is so stupid to like be like a diamond player and think, oh, I could balance. I've never studied game design in my entire
Yeah.
life. And I can make a better set than the Riot team. Like, dude, like come on.
Yeah.
Like, please.
Yeah.
Love to hear your thoughts on augments themselves, Asa. We've talked a lot about like good augments, bad augments. They're sticking around in some form for set 7 because this is in itself a variance discussion. It's increased a significant amount, like it's added variance significantly to the game. I was wondering if you find them enjoyable. Like specifically, do you like augments? Do you like the play style that comes from augments? Do you want to see them stick around?
I think the set 6. So I think most people I actually think the set 6 augments were better than 6.5. I'm not sure if that's just because the whole system was new, but I'm looking at like a lot of the augments in 6.5, and I just feel like so many of them do like very similar things. For example, Celeste, Second Wind, Makeshift, Phalanx, um, they're just all very similar. It's just like it just makes your team a little bit tankier. I do understand like yes, there are some differences, and same thing with like Disintegrator, Electric Charge, Lunan's Echo. There's so many more of them, and obviously it's like okay, Disintegrator is better if you have high attack speed. Lunan's better if you have low mana cost. electric charge is better if you have a lot of HP. But it's like I feel like there's so much overlap where it's like, well, I have 3 choices and they all just give me a little bit more damage. So I would actually like to see augments be a little more like out there, I guess. Like I'm just gonna look at the list for like silver augments because like those are the most tame. I think cybernetics is great. Like that changes the way you have to play the game. I think like dominance is great. Hyper roll is great. Lifelong learning is like really interesting. Although it's like again like balancing where it's like right now it's not really worthwhile. I think exiles is really interesting where it's like hey you get a really powerful effect but you have to sacrifice your positioning. Keepers is very similar there. So I think augments like that are really interesting. But when it comes to all these things like Ludens, Electric Charge, even something like Sunfire Board, yes, it's different, but in the end, all of these are just like, hey, no matter what your board is, you get a little bit more damage. I'm not. I wish there's a little less overlap in that regard.
Fascinating.
It's not. Again, it's not like I have a decision to make. It's like, okay, I have challengers. I'm offered, Disintegrators versus Ludens, so I take Disintegrator. Or it's like I'm playing Arcanist and I get offered Disintegrator versus Ludens. It's like, okay, I take Ludens. It's like it's not an interesting choice. So I would like less overlap in that regard.
I think
Yeah.
like a lot of it, if I, yeah, I think that a lot of it, especially with the mid set, is that I feel like you can tell. Like there are parts of this mid set where you can really see the sort of what is it 10-week dev cycle of like the mid set like. And the fact that like so many of the augments just amount to essential like flat stat increases, like you can sort of see that like they were like, okay, we need to make X amount of new augments, but we only have so much amount of time to like actually sort of make like these like new things, right? So we're gonna make some really simple like silver augments, some really simple gold augments, so we can pull more time to like make them more sort of trickier ones, right? I think like in a perfect world, like every augment would sort of make you rethink how you play your board, rethink how you make like position your units. I think like another really good example is something like like I really like augments like makeshift armor, like blue battery, meditation. These augments that, like on the surface, yes, they're flat. They are stat increases of some kind, but they force you to fundamentally play the game in a different way.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I think that those augments are like by far the most like enjoyable to play. But I think it also does need to be said that like there is a human dev side to it where like they only have so much time to make so many augments that are like that, and it's they also have to like design champions. They got to balance set. Like they got to do so much extra stuff as well. So I think it's like on my wish list. It's like yes, I would love to see more augments that fundamentally transform how you play the game, but also recognize that like our devs, like the devs are humans, and they can only make so many interesting, unique augments, right?
They made a lot of
Yeah.
augments. They made a lot of
There's a lot
augments
of
for
really
sure.
cool ones, like Reconfabulator, like new in 6.5 is like super cool.
Yeah.
Golden Egg is like really exciting.
Getting a Radiant Zephyr, I think, is quite fun.
Future Sight is very
That
exciting.
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not that it's a bad thing, but I mean, there's like 80, 84
That's a lot.
augments or something like that.
Yeah, that's a lot.
There's a lot. And that does eat into design time. And I also think that that's why it's such a significantly enjoyable set. And that's why I think the ones in 6.0 were maybe slightly better, because they actually put a lot of the emphasis from set 5 and 5.5 into tuning up set 6, because it was their most ambitious project that they'd done up until that date. Mort said so himself, like the balance and the changes that they made in 5 and 5.5 were specifically smaller, and there was less people put onto those things because they were working on set 6. And aside from them taking a while to get like what champions you got out of which emblem correct, I mean, there wasn't a lot wrong with the augments in set 6. Really, that would be my point on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a set mechanic, augments are by far like the best one. So it just adds so much like variation to every game.
Yeah, agreed, guys. I mean, I think we've Sol, unless you've got more, I think we may have literally talked around human nature and variance all for the last hour. I think
It's definitely a very five-head episode.
it definitely was. I feel smarter just having been here.
Uh-huh.
I think let's move to questions now while we are here. We got a lot of fun questions. So guys, if you can listen to this live, of course, sometimes Tuesday night, sometimes on Wednesday afternoons in Australian Eastern Standard Time. If you are interested in asking questions, you can join our Discord, which is always linked in the description, or you can ask questions during the live Twitch chat. And this is where I hand over to Sol to facilitate some of the questions that we may have.
Alright, sweet. I guess I'll start with this one, I guess. Man, a lot of these questions are very poker related. I hope that's okay.
What a surprise.
Yeah, that's that's totally fine.
Yeah, alright. I was gonna, yeah. So we'll start off with saying that, so the question basically is, so the panel has spoken at length a lot about card games. You know, Bodhi here, Cutler, he has played a lot of sort of Pokemon trading card game before he got into TFT. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering and poker, of course. What are some sort of your highlights and sort of huge moments, Asa, in your sort of really storied sort of career playing poker professionally?
So let me think. I guess like in poker, you're always playing for like whatever stakes that you choose to play for. Like I could go to a Commerce Casino and choose to gamble, like go all in and lose like $100 maximum or like 10,000 maximum. So I guess like some of the highlights for me are what they call it shot taking. Like when you play bigger games, a lot of times the reason why you might do it is because there's like a certain player in the game that's just like, wow, like I can't resist this. For me, like one of my first experiences was in Los Angeles, and there's a guy who was going all in every single hand for however much money. By the end of the day, it was for like 100,000. I only stayed for not that long, but I remember I brought like I knew I played with this guy before, and then I heard he was at the casino, so I went there. I brought like I got like as much money as I could, and I